Hi everybody, it's Roberta Heal. Welcome to this webinar, Breaking the Silence, Addressing Menopause in the Modern Workplace. This was originally broadcast on March 27th, 2024 on behalf of Prime Care Family Health Team. Hope you enjoy it. Recording and doing the presentation, it's a little distracting, but afterwards I'm happy to answer questions and we can go from there. I have a land acknowledgement because I live and work in Sudbury, Ontario. I acknowledge in the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and also further recognize that I'm located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng and Anishinaabe, and that the city of Greater Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of the Wahnapitae First Nation. And I extend my deepest respect to Indigenous people, Miigwech. Okay, so a little bit about me, my journey. So why menopause and why me? Well, I've been a nurse practitioner for now 25 years, at the time a few years ago. And I was going through a lot with the work that I was doing and thinking, what can I do that would really be meaningful and exciting for me? So I thought, well, I was noticing a massive input of media and social media and all kinds of stuff about menopause at the time. And I thought, this is really speaking to me and I want to do something for women going through menopause. So I thought, I'm going to start a virtual menopause clinic. And I thought, how hard can it be? I've been a nurse practitioner in primary care for like decades. And then I thought, oh my goodness, there's so much I don't know. And I was kind of shocked and actually a little ashamed because I thought, I keep up with stuff. I keep up with diabetes guidelines and thyroid guidelines and everything. So why didn't I keep up with the information about this? And what I found was that when I became a nurse practitioner, soon after, a big study came out you might have heard of called the Women's Health Initiative. And it basically said that hormone replacement therapy was bad. And it seemed as if everything stopped there in the medical world. And what I discovered was there was a huge gap in knowledge. And I mean, keep in mind, I've been teaching nurse practitioners too. It's not just NPs, it was the medical system that just hasn't kept up with menopause care issues. And the problem is that menopause impacts so many people. It's basically a little pandemic of its own. That's maybe not the right word, for women between ages 40 and 60. And for some reason, we just haven't kept up. So menopause has had a moment, and it's continuing. And I dove in and I studied and I became certified with the Menopause Society, and I opened my clinic and I've cared for women. And what I found is they are suffering. I get emails from women to say things like, I've saved their lives. And it's like, my goodness, I'm just providing treatment, evidence-based treatment. And what I've come to realize is that menopause is more than just symptoms. It impacts every aspect of a woman's life. And it's definitely work. Of course, we spend so much time at work. Of course, it means that it's going to also impact our work today. So let's talk a little bit about menopause at work. So these are the things I want to talk about. It's not going to be really technical or anything, the discussion. I think I'm going to talk about things that people are well aware of, but try to integrate it and give you some information and context with respect to menopause at work. So we're going to talk about menopausal symptoms. We're going to talk about menopause and working, and then we're going to talk about approaches to both of these things that might be helpful for you or for an organization that you work for. I first want to acknowledge that when I talk about menopause, I'll say women, female, her, but this information, these symptoms are also relevant to people who are not identifying as women, female, or her, and includes anyone who has menopausal symptoms. Okay, quick terminology stuff. And of course, it's not hugely important, but it does provide us with some common ground to speak with. So menopause is actually just a point in time, 12 months after your final menstrual period. And perimenopause starts in a woman's 40s, typically, can start earlier though, usually when a woman's menstrual cycles become irregular or when they start to experience symptoms of menopause, and it lasts until a year after the final menstrual period. So the menopause transition includes perimenopause up to menopause. Natural menopause is menopause that occurs without medical intervention. So if you've had a hysterectomy with your ovaries removed, or if you've had chemotherapy or radiation or anything that puts you into menopause state from other means, surgical, chemical, that sort of thing, then that's not natural menopause. It doesn't mean you don't have symptoms. Oh my goodness, sometimes you have them worse. But I just wanted to give that differentiation. Postmenopause, of course, being the time after menopause. And the difficulty is it's all encompassing menopause, and it's basically occurring, of course, with the fluctuation of hormones. The most significant of them tends to be estrogen. And of course, it's complicated because there are a number of reasons why women's hormones can fluctuate and they can have symptoms, even if it's not related to menopause. And it impacts so many different parts of our bodies that different women present with different symptoms. They have different sensitivities to changing, fluctuating hormones. So it's a very complex time in our lives from a lot of perspectives. But now let's turn to some of the symptoms that possibly influence work. And again, these aren't going to be a surprise to anybody. Of course, irregular periods. But what are the key factors that impact a woman with respect to irregular periods? Well, certainly that they're unexpected, and of course that you can have them, they can be very severe. So you can end up with something called flooding. And I think, if you've gone through something like this, think of being at work. Think of working a shift if you're a shift worker, a nurse. Think if you are making a presentation at work, or if you are driving for work and you suddenly have this unexpected period that is very heavy. It really it really puts things in perspective of the kind of issues that women face. Okay, hot flashes. We all know about hot flashes. About 80% of women experience them, but they last on average 7 years. That means they can last a lot longer than that. That's on average. They can start quite a bit early into from the perimenopause and go quite a bit later. I read a study that said hot flashes can occur up into the women's early 70s. So I think some of the things to think about too are the severity and the intensity. Just like different women experience symptoms differently and it respond differently to changing hormones, women will have different side effects and symptoms. And one of those is being a super soaker. Let's talk about that and how it impacts work. Can you imagine being one of these poor souls that ends up with being a super soaker in the middle of a meeting or a shift? It's alarming and difficult for these women to deal with. And then the flip side is the bottom down here where they have chills, so they can become intensely warm and then intensely cold. Some other things, though, and it's sort of work adjacent, is that hot flashes are independently associated with cardiac risk. So the more intense your hot flashes, the higher your risks are with cardiac disease. And then often there's heart palpitations. These are things that are sometimes really difficult because they are something for workplaces to be aware of this increased risk, and maybe a time to support women for healthier lifestyles and stuff during this time. We all as a society understand that hormone fluctuations during our cycles or postpartum can lead to anxiety and depression and mental health issues. But for some reason, we haven't quite got it into our heads that when hormone fluctuations happen during the menopause transition, the same thing can occur. And many women suffer from at this time and end up being treated for depression, which might be the case, but really there we would hope that there'd be some consideration for the fact that it may be hormonally related as well. So those are things to think about. And of course, it impacts work. All right. Now, here is a big one, sleep problems. Every woman I see in my clinics tells me that they have insomnia. And research will show that as we progress from pre-menopause to perimenopause to post-menopause, our ability to fall asleep, stay asleep, and waking up too early gets worse, progressively worse during this time. I happened to be at a conference, the Canadian Menopause Society conference in November last year. It was amazing. And one of the speakers is a sleep specialist. And he was saying that in his opinion and experience, the fact that women present with this waking up in the night, that rush of cortisol you get, and you're fully awake in the middle of the night, and it's a full arousal. He sees that as as maybe one of the early signs of perimenopause. It needs to be addressed because if it isn't treated and treated properly, then women can end up with a chronic insomnia. The other thing to think about is obstructive sleep apnea. This can be hugely debilitating for women, and it's very underreported and underdiagnosed in women. Now, it's not only related to obesity or gaining weight. Obviously, that's one of the risk factors. But as estrogen goes down, the structures, musculature, and in our pharynx and our throat softens, and it puts us at more risk for this. But women are less likely to be identified as a snorer or to have those gaps of breathing. So that can become a real problem and certainly adds to the fatigue that women have. Restless leg syndrome is another issue. And interestingly, one of the key triggers for worsening, exacerbating restless leg syndrome is low iron levels. If you're having flooding and you're bleeding like that, you're going to lose iron. So it's all a self-fulfilling prophecy almost with some of these issues. But sleeping isn't an issue unless it impacts function. However, my goodness, the women I care for and the women I know in my life who go through the menopause transition and have these issues with sleep talk about the difficulties in functioning and day to day. So, from a work perspective, it's huge. Okay, memory problems. Okay, brain fog, this whole brain fog thing. Women find they have trouble finding words, they have trouble remembering little things, and it's very alarming for women who've been really on their game and, at work and sharp and they have high knowledge levels and to find like I'm doing now, like looking for the words, it's very it's very upsetting. Now, research is showing, and I just started reading the menopause brain, and it's amazing because the research is showing that women will go back to their baseline after a few years, unless they have a diagnosed early dementia, but that's hopefully not the case. However, in the meantime, it's very disturbing to go through those types of things. And it's obviously, if you're not sleeping, it makes it a lot worse. All right, so headaches are definitely another one. They can become worse and exacerbated. Weight gain and slowed metabolism. Again, this isn't necessarily something that fully directly impacts the work. But you know what? A woman who isn't feeling well, who is at higher risk for chronic diseases, et cetera, because of a slow metabolism, that has potential to impact their work. So even if there's no change in exercise and eating, metabolism slows and there is often weight gain and it's redistributed to the belly. Women are at risk for cardiac disease, hypertension, elevated cholesterol. There's insulin resistance and diabetes. So these are all things that, I mean, during this time, you've got all this stuff going on at the same time your body metabolism is changing and putting you at risk for these potential cardiac chronic diseases that are really have a huge impact on your life. So yes, it's going to affect your work. All right. Vaginal dryness and pain with intercourse. Again, not directly related, but all of these factors and the fact that women are suffering from a lot of different things can impact relationships. And relationships are hugely important. And of course, that can filter into our day-to-day lives. But the changes in the tissue in the perineal area also increase urinary frequency, UTIs, which has a huge impact on some people's work lives. Itchiness and irritation, ugh, nobody wants that. And of course, low libido. Well, the other thing to consider too are the myriad of other symptoms. I'm going to talk about those next week, some of them. I mean, I can't even get into them all. Joint pain and hair loss, and women are at higher risk for developing autoimmune disease at this time. So, some of the issues are that women don't even recognize some of these symptoms as being part of the menopause transition. And I'll give you an example. I've had such foot pain, terrible foot pain, and I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I'd walk halfway around the block and I want to exercise, and it became very, very difficult. So I finally realized that it was part of the changes during the menopause transition for me. So we know that the symptoms can happen, but let's talk a little bit more about what can happen in the workplace. For me, I always carry a small fan with me, a little hand fan. And I remember a few years ago, I pulled it out at a meeting and there were men there and women, and they all laughed and they thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I'm like, you know, it's I'm tough. I didn't falter, but I thought, it would have been really upsetting had I been in a different state of mind, etc. I'll give you an example of another person who told me that attending an important meeting with about 40 people at a conference center, and she hadn't had a period for almost a year, and then realized during the meeting that she was having one coming on. So she left to go to the bathroom at the conference center. Her hotel room was about a 20-minute walk away. So she really had a choice: leave the meeting altogether or figure it out there. So in the bathroom of the conference center, rinsed everything out, dried it under the hand fan, and went back to the meeting feeling really self-conscious and having trouble concentrating. There's so many possible issues depending on where you work and what's going on in your life that can impact where menopause can have an impact on work. Okay, so yes, women often face challenges in the workplace related to menopause symptoms. So, for example, are the bathroom facilities adequate enough for discrete product changes? Or is there difficulty taking breaks when you have symptoms like hot flashes or fatigue, which can impact productivity? And what about issues like lack of understanding and support for menopause symptoms that can potentially lead to discomfort and reduce your efficiency at work? And looking at why I don't think it's a big secret as to why this happens. There's a huge stigma still today with menopause, talking about menopause in some areas, and it's viewed very negatively by society. Society devalues older women, and this contributes to the stigma surrounding menopause. And I heard this anecdote at the conference last year. Oh my goodness. Don Lemon, who was a commentator with CNN, was commenting on Nikki Haley, who was a presidential candidate, and he said she's not in her prime, and that if you Google it, women are in their prime in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Nikki Haley was 51 at the time, so that doesn't leave us with a good impression. So what's being proposed and thought about and hopefully researched is that menopausal symptoms are now being seen as maybe the reason why women are having trouble with the glass ceiling and moving up the ladder, because menopause transition sort of hits at a critical time in their careers, and that society devalues women, and this can lead to biases with hiring and promotion decisions, and that can impact career opportunities. And there's sometimes a problem with the lack of support, which can result in women leaving or going to different jobs. So, reducing workforce diversity and affecting overall organizational success. The UK has huge programs for menopause and work and menstrual issues and workplace. They're very much ahead of North America. One survey that they did with women demonstrated that 73% of women said that they suffered from menopause symptoms, and 67 said they had psychological symptoms and mood disturbances, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, etc. Of those, 44% were reluctant to discuss their symptoms. 39, or close to 40%, were embarrassed to talk about menopause at work, and 60% wanted menopause work support in the workplace. So another survey from some of the other countries, Australia, Canada, US, identified women thought that their employer was not supportive. So that's 3/4. And a third feared of being thought of as weak or old or past their prime if they discussed menopause. 87% of women needed support in the workplace and identified it. And 75% said that workplaces would benefit from providing support. Okay, so a survey of Canadian nurses, and having worked as a nurse in the hospital, I can tell you, whew, I just could think to myself, oh my goodness, I'm glad I didn't work shift work when I was going through menopause. I think that would have been the end of me. The survey of Canadian nurses showed that they suffered a great deal during menopause transition. They were often exhausted, and that it took so much more time to recover. And one nurse said that it took all her days off to recover her energy level to go back to work for the next shifts. They had issues with things like heavy bleeding, which was difficult to manage on shift. Most felt that they couldn't speak to their managers about menopause. And interestingly, many of them self accommodated, meaning they switched to part time work or departments so they could manage their symptoms more easily. And of course, that meant leaving their current workplace where they had potentially, a lot of knowledge and experience and leadership. And then, of course, there were the women who were interested in quitting. They were intending to quit because they were having a hard time with it. And it's estimated that 1 in 10 women will leave the workforce because of their menopause symptoms. So you think, okay, well, that's 1 in 10. That's only 10%. That's a huge number because at this time, there are more than 10 million women in Canada age 40 years and older. More than 25% of our workforce are women ages 44 to 55. It's the fastest growing population cohort in Canada. So this is a huge, huge issue. So like I said, I have the virtual menopause clinic, and I offer care to women with symptoms during the menopause transition and beyond. And unfortunately, like I was saying, healthcare hasn't caught up with research and treatment for menopause for a great number of, for many of the women that I see. In fact, all of them, I would say. They aren't able to receive evidence-based menopause care. Many of the women in your organization and you might not even really realize that the symptoms you're having are related to menopause, and they may not have a provider who's knowledgeable about the menopause symptoms and treatment. And the result of all this is that 80% of women go untreated for their menopause symptoms. But looking at these quotes from people that I've seen, it's clear that we need to change that. Women need to have support and offer and help, let's say, whatever they choose, whatever works with their lives, because not every woman is eligible or able to take hormones. And let's talk about economics because that's often where it hits home. So there's lost productivity due to menopause costs of employers in Canada is $237 million annually, but it's the women who are losing out because the estimated $3.3 billion is lost annually due to women leaving the workforce or working fewer hours during their peak earning years. And keeping in mind, this projected increase demographic of women over 40 is going from 25 to 43% in the next 10, 15 years. So think about how many of your employees or the women that you work with or you yourself are women age 40 and older, and think about them leaving the workplace because of menopause symptoms. Thinking about your workplace in particular and how difficult it is to recruit and invest in skilled workers. I mean, I know in my area there is a sort of an ongoing semi-annual nursing job fair, and for every person that's hired, there's marketing, there's an interviewing, hiring, and orientation. And how long does it take for employees to be fully functional in the workplace? And then what is the stress on the current employees during this process? So how much does the hiring process really cost as compared to, say, the cost of supporting the current workforce in your organization? So it's really important to try for organizations to try to retain the knowledge and skills and leadership of this huge cohort of employees that they have. Really, I don't think that organizations are going to be able to ignore menopause for long. It's important because it helps with the retaining of skilled workers. It reduces recruitment costs associated with replacing experienced employees. It improves employees' morale and loyalty through inclusive workplace practices, and it enhances productivity by addressing menopausal symptoms that could impact work performance. Okay, so I have developed a program. It's a course and consultation, but it's based on the Menopause Foundation of Canada's Menopause Works Here. The focus of the Menopause Foundation of Canada is on inclusivity. So this is a word we've heard many times, particularly in the last few years, as we strive towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recognition and support for women during the menopause years is inclusivity. It gives them better quality of life and rewards the employer with a more productive employee who has the potential to provide the organization with years more productive work. Support required for menopause will differ depending on the organization. That's obvious. But the Menopause Foundation has put together these pillars and they give us a starting point. So, for an organizational perspective, culture and communication need to be addressed. And anybody who's worked for an organization that's trying to change its culture will know it's extremely difficult to do this at times, but very important. And it requires commitment and buy in from all levels of an organization. It includes a review of the current status, education, strategic planning, and maybe branding and marketing. Policies are the backbone of an organization. They tell people about an issue and how it should be addressed and who does what and why. So, changing policies can be a really long process as well. There are a lot of players that have to be in place. There's a lot of approvals that have to happen. So, accommodations for menopausal symptoms. Again, it's going to change depending on the workplace and depending on a myriad of factors. But there are some things to consider. The accommodations can range from simple to complex. For example, allowing more bathroom breaks versus renovating the bathroom. So, one example I read was really interesting called hot desking. A hot desk, of course, is if the organization coming back from the pandemic has decided that people will not be in the office full time and they've reduced their office space, people will share the office on different days. Sometimes, potentially, a woman could be in an office space that's makes it very difficult for her to manage her symptoms. So, allowing people to schedule to be in a better environment is helpful. Desk fans or access to windows, there are all kinds of different ways to accommodate a woman manage better with the symptoms that she has for menopause. Benefits. Okay, so this is more than just comprehensive drug coverage, although that is hugely important. Keeping in mind again that not every woman is able to take the pharmaceutical um, treatments for menopause. However, it's got to be more than that because menopause care, as we've just described, as I've just described, is really difficult for some women to get to get access to, and if they do so, it costs money. Oftentimes, it's not covered under plans, benefits packages at work. So that's a place where potentially there can be some support for women. But this isn't all about organizations because you are individuals and you've come tonight to ask about, to listen about menopause at work. So, what can you do? Well, yes, educate yourselves. And that's what you're doing today. Find out about what are the policies in your organization? Is there anything in place for women to go to? Is there a point person? Is there a champion? Is there an HR person? Is there an EAP person? What are the current strategies that are in place? I say find a community, and you guys are doing that now. You're all on here now. I'm sure that many of you are tapping into social media stuff and all that sorts of things. And if you can find a community within your workplace, that might also be helpful for you because then together you can make a difference in the workplace for menopausal women needing to have their symptoms and need supported. And then finally, be strategic. How many people in your organization are actually struggling with menopause? Who do you need to talk to at your organization? How can you get these accommodations? And what would be the best accommodations based on your particular organization? Okay, as I mentioned, and I think some of this can be made available, I'm not sure. The Menopause Foundation of Canada is a great, fairly new organization that has a lot of resources that you can join and get information and be updated when new things are going on. So that's a really helpful place to go. And this is some information to link to my website because I've got some blogs and videos and some courses and stuff that you might be interested in. So if you do have any more questions, you can reach me at info@virtualmenopauseclinic.com.